Good evening and welcome to this November 6th Budget Workshop number 1 for the Board of Supervisors. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do a quick roll call. Supervisor McCartney.
I am here.
Supervisor Lewis.
Here.
Supervisor Ross.
Here.
And Supervisor Blundy.
Here.
All right, all present and accounted for. With that, we're just going to jump right into it. Tonight we have the 2026 budget presentation focused on operating revenues and expenses. This is part of a two-part workshop experience for everyone. Tonight is really mostly higher level with the details, let's say, coming on Monday, also at 7 p.m. And tonight, I guess our main event here is our CFO, Mega. So take it away.
So good evening. For those who don't,
Yeah, it's just.
there we go. Can you guys hear me?
He's already starting. Yeah, you're good.
Can you hear now? Say something, Jen.
Hello?
You're good.
All right, thank you. Sorry. Good evening. For those who don't know me, my name is Makefield Township, and I'm the Chief Financial Officer here at the Township. I started back in December of 2024. Yesterday, I sent the board a copy of the budget workshop presentation, as well as the 2026 draft operating budget, and then you have one in front of you as well. And if any of the attendees would like one, there is a presentation and an agenda at the front for your convenience.
Mega, just so you know, we also provided copies to the two newly elected supervisors that will be joining us next year as a courtesy copy.
Perfect.
Their work.
Thank you. So please note that this draft represents the operating budget, which includes only fixed year-over-year costs and no operational or service changes. At this stage, there are no capital projects in this budget. We want to leave that for discussion at the next budget. Right now, we want to show you what the operating budget looks like year-to-date status quo without any additional changes at this point or new capital.
The other, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. The other thing is that there are no interfund transfers being shown either. So again, the idea is to start sort of on the base operations or operating level, and then we'll talk through some of the typical and potential interfund transfers as well as we go through.
Correct. So it has been a challenging year, which you'll see in the next few slides. We really need to focus on a strategy to help fund our funds moving forward from a revenue standpoint, and we need to really start looking at financial stability. So just to go over the agenda really quick, here's a brief overview of today's agenda. I will begin by reviewing the budget process, so what the project process has been thus far. I'll discuss the proposed 2026 budget, which includes key factors, implemented cost savings and measures, the general fund, parks and rec fund, pool fund, golf fund, and then other funds in general. The next item will be the status of the fund balances and net position at the end of the year and moving forward as it looks today. And then last, we'll just quickly notate that the next budget workshop is on November 10th and what we'll be discussing there. Okay. So for the budget process, the first thing is we started with the monthly and quarterly reviews of expenses. As you know, each month we would provide you a report and then quarterly a presentation on the ongoing revenue and expenses throughout the year. In September, we requested budgets from the department heads to start the budget process in general. We had director budget meetings with me as well as Dave in September as well, towards the end of September. We created our first draft in October, which is what we're presenting to you today at the budget workshop. And then Moving forward, on Monday, we will have our budget workshop 2, which will specifically be on capital projects. We are hoping to present the preliminary budget on November 19th and then have the board approve the budget on December 17th.
In parallel to this, last night's meeting, we had lots of presentations that were budget adjacent, I'll say. You've also been coordinating with the folks that presented last evening.
Yes.
So everything here is consistent with what we heard last
Yes.
night, right? Okay.
Yes, very consistent with everything. I mean, what they've mentioned is basically what I'm seeing as well. It's the same information.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so key budgets for factors for budgeting. So number one, on the revenue side, there were several factors that influenced the 2026 budget assumptions. The real estate property tax assessment, as provided by the Bucks County Board of Assessment, has slightly decreased year over year. So they're estimating coming in at $5,553,980, or sorry, $5,553,983,080
Dan,
in 2025 budget, and then in 26 it's going down slightly.
do we ask questions? I'm sorry, I did think
No.
you had stopped for a second.
You're
but
okay.
Do we ask questions? Do we wait till it's over?
I mean,
What makes sense?
personal preference is if there's a burning question, maybe if we could wait
I'd
till she
like-
gets through her thought, ask along the way.
Yeah.
That way it's clear. But yeah, I have no issue with asking questions along the
Okay.
way. It's very interactive right now.
All right, so my apologies, I did think you were done with that thought, but I would like, just a short explanation, right? We know that there have been no reassessments, but we also all know that housing prices are going up, so can you help us understand how that part's going down?
So I think that there was an overestimate in prior year from the Board of Assessments. We get that through Bucks County. They give us that assessment based on parcels in the area and the current assessment. There could have been, although they haven't done a reassessment overall, there could be some reassessments on smaller properties that might have been bought, like open spaces or other things where they may not be taxed. There's also veteran-owned ownership, parcels that are veteran-owned that could have changed from a tax perspective. There's constant changes throughout the year that could lead to an issue.
And you can
For a
appeal your
change.
assessment too.
Yeah, and probably assessment appeals as well. Again, it's obviously a
Correct.
slight decrease or reduction in terms of the assessment. I mean, just as I think was communicated last night and again, has been, I think, reported before, assessment growth year over year, has been sub 1%. So it's typically been about, I think, like 0.65% year over year growth. So that, again, this is showing a slight reduction, but even in circumstances where there has not been reduction, the growth in assessed value has been sub 1% on an annual basis.
Yeah, it's been pretty stable. There hasn't been a lot of growth in general, and even in looking at it, sometimes you might see a little bit of a jump in a certain year because maybe there's less delinquents coming in for that year. There's more people paying on time and, within the year. So there's always a trend, a difference here and there between the years.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Another factor in budgeting are interest rates. Interest rates are trending down, so we're going to see a little bit of an adjustment year over year. Another thing that we have to factor is fund balance and cash balance. As our cash balance goes down, as we utilize cash balance, as the funds, have less operating revenue coming in, the amount of interest we're getting or the amount of interest earnings we're getting on those dollars is going to decline. So we do have to factor that into the budgeting. All other sources of revenue are, overall stable with very little growth. Some might have a little bit of growth here and there, but year over year, they're pretty stable with some decline and a few increases. We did incorporate some normal year-over-year fee increases that we generally take into the budget. That's also considered throughout. Again, as Dave noted earlier, budgeted interfund transfers, we do have a couple that are included. One is the required LMT Sewer Trust interest distribution that we must take. That is in the budget. And then there's a small, it's basically an in and out for the Garden of Reflection fund, where they don't have a fund balance at this time, so we have to utilize Park and Rec funds to be able to sustain the maintenance of that monument. So that is the only piece. We do have a contract with them where they do give us a certain amount of funding, and we are working with them to see what we can do to help increase that funding that's coming through, as well as the fact that we have a small community fund allocation. We're working through it, but for now, as we work through it, because it isn't guaranteed that we will get that reimbursement, we have to budget it somehow, and so.
I think that's a future discussion for the board to have to.
Definitely.
How to deal with that.
Definitely. It is definitely. And when I get to the GOR slide, you'll see, and it's part of the other funds that I will mention that as well. As far as expenses are, there in this budget, there are no changes to current staffing. We have probably the perfect amount of staff at this point. There's really no redundancy overall. And there are no staffing addition requests or changes at this point. From a wage perspective, mostly contracted wages are built in. The police is 4%, which is per the contract. The Public Works wage increase is 3.9%, which is per the contract, and then increases in general for the staff follow that at 3.9% for inflation. Retirement is going up slightly. Again, I wouldn't say slightly, I would say there's actually a decent increase on the post-retirement benefits for retirees. We've had quite a few retirees this year that have already made an exit and will be making an exit towards the end of the year. So that is increasing our post-retirement benefits overall. As far as insurances, our health insurance is unfortunately increasing by 22.6% this year. That is typical right now in the market, unfortunately. Our two other insurance components, workers' comp with Delaware Valley Health Trust, is increasing 4%, but we do have a decline on the property and liability side of 2.8% year over year, so there's a little bit of help there. We have not, and I've reached out several times, unfortunately, to Porter and Curtis, who is our SWIF, or our volunteer fire company provider. I've put in an estimate at this point of 3.2%, just based on prior years of what that increase has been. I should hopefully get a sound idea of what that is shortly. I did call them again today to get that, to see if I can get the invoice. We unfortunately have to chase that down.
Can I just say one thing?
Of course.
Just in terms of health insurance, obviously that, the significant cost, significant increase. Just to provide some context, so we are essentially self-insured through an intergovernmental cooperative. So the bulk of what we pay in premium goes into a claims fund. It does not go to, a fully insured carrier that then uses that excess as profit margin in essence. So roughly, I think it's close to 75 cents of every dollar that we spend on health insurance spend goes into a claim fund to pay specific claims related to the folks that are on the insurance or receiving insurance through us. So from an efficiency standpoint, it is probably the most efficient way to ensure that typical employer responsibility or requirement. To the extent that we see reductions in claim expense, we would have the potential of getting a surplus distribution back. So I just want to put some context around that. This is a function of claims experience. It's not a function of anything other than claims experience. In terms of overall sort of plan design, again, the bulk of our employees at this point are covered under collective bargaining agreements that establish certain levels of benefit. In 2026, in anticipation for 2027, we will be negotiating a new collective bargaining agreement with the police department, which is our largest base of employees. We would expect through that discussion, given the extent of spend that's on the health insurance side, and the relatively nominal cost share that exists, that we will be looking at a number of strategies to try to reduce that. But I do just want you to know that when we see this increase, the increase is a function of our claims experience. And from an efficiencies perspective, we have perhaps the most efficient model that you could have in terms of funding that exposure. So,
One quick question. Our average employee age is going down with retirements. Will that help us in our claims experience in the out years, so we might not have as large of increase in future years? Or, I mean,
yeah, I mean,
too early to tell.
yeah, I mean, I think it's probably too early to tell at this point, because again, there is some exposure on the post-retirement medical insurance side of things. The other thing, sort of just backing up, while Mega says and she's right, there's, as we know, there's folks retiring that do enjoy post-retirement medical insurance benefits. On the next slide, because I know James will ask, what are we doing on the, well, you all asked, what are we doing on the expense side of things, not just simply the revenue side. As you will recall, in this most recent negotiation with the Public Works employees, while there was an enhancement to incent these older workers to transition on, there ultimately was an elimination of that benefit. So from a long-term liability perspective, we're seeing an uptick, but we'll eventually see a decrease in that spend by virtue of the elimination of that benefit.
I guess big picture as well, with the current federal government shutdown and the state government, budget issues, is that negatively impacting anything that we're projecting for 2026?
Not really. I mean, again, maybe on sort of the capital side, in terms of external state funding, as they don't have, programs that have been reauthorized or whatever. But in terms of this issue on the operating side, no.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
The last thing I was going to say about this is most of these expenses represent fixed costs. We have very limited control over them, unfortunately. Okay. Now going to everyone's favorite slide, implemented cost savings measures. So first of all, as part of a continued effort to manage our expenses and operate efficiently, we've initiated several key cost measure savings, and collectively, these initiatives have resulted in significant savings across the township. So, number one, as Dave was saying, we had a healthcare insurance transition. We transitioned from a fully insured Independence Blue Cross and Blue Shield, which was fully insured, to a self-insured Independence Administrator through PIMIC. That resulted in $327,000 and $532 in savings, which is, a 12.3% saving. We eliminated our broker relationship this year with CBIZ. I'm not sure if you guys knew about that, but we did that very recently in 2025. That resulted in a savings of approximately $35,000 to $40,000. That's about $41 per employee that we were paying. Dental insurance, we transitioned from Health Now to Guardian, producing an annual savings of $32,069. We implemented an IT vendor transition. This was our first year, achieving an annual base fee savings of approximately $90,000 to $100,000. From a staffing perspective, we eliminated a role under me, the payroll accountant position, generating an annual savings of approximately $100,000. We restructured the police department command structure, resulting in a $36,000 savings. This year, we also transitioned cell phone providers from Verizon to T-Mobile, saving approximately $24,000 annually. From a professional services standpoint, we ended up internalizing many tasks previously performed by the township engineer and solicitor, which created an estimated savings of about $150,000. From a benefit standpoint, we are working right now, as we speak, on transitioning our short-term, long-term, and life benefits from Standard to the Hartford using a vendor called Triben. With that transition, we have locked in a 3-year guarantee and a savings of approximately $30,000 year over year. So Standard was trying to give us a 20% increase this year. And by moving to this vendor, which is exactly the same with the same plan overall, we're able to save. And as Dave mentioned earlier, we eliminated the DPW, or Public Works post-retirement medical benefits for employees hired after January 1st, 2025. We don't have, obviously, a cost savings at this point, but we will see quite a bit of savings moving forward once, that turnover happens. As you can see, overall, these efforts reflect our proactive approach to reducing costs, increasing efficiency, and protecting long-term financial stability. Cost savings and analysis is ongoing. This budget is what it is today, but as we go through the year, as we see things that can be fixed and changed, we are changing them. We are making efforts to make sure that we're saving money for the township. Okay, so now we're going to go into it. So here are the general fund revenues. This is what we look like. I do want to mention we now have a 5-year plan in place. This is, again, operating budget as it looks today based on, what's coming in today at this point. I do want to point out, and you'll see in the next slide, as I mentioned earlier, the assessment for real estate property tax is slightly down. You're seeing that reflected in the budget, but then we do build it up slightly. Again, Dave mentioned a little bit less than 1% each year to kind of restabilize that just based on prior year growth that we've seen. We have introduced amusement tax into the budget starting in 2026. That is, we're estimating about $500,000 in revenue that will help us in the long run. That is under the local Act 511 taxes, and again, I'll show you that in detail in the next slide. Additionally, I did mention that interest rates are, trending down slightly, so you're going to see that as the years go by. We can't rely on that at this point. And then overall, most of the other revenue sources do stay stable. There are currently no grants built in, minus the recycling grant that we get usually every year. If there's more opportunities, we will always, move forward to try to get those. And as like I mentioned as well earlier, the one interfund transfer that we do have in here right now is the LMT sewer fund interest transfer. You do see that there's other interfund transfers. That's our pension, our MMO. We utilize part of the general fund and other funds to do transfers to our pension fund. And that's why you see it under interfund transfer. It's just how it's booked, but I did want to point that out. And that's on the expense side, by the way. I'll show you that in a minute. So as far as key revenue drivers, these are kind of our main key revenue drivers. I did want to show you in detail since everything's rolled up on the summary page. As you can see, amusement taxes are coming in 2026. That's a new revenue item. Interest rates are dropping a little bit by $40,000, just again, based on the decrease in interest rates and just our fund balance going down year over year. Local service taxes, I think we budgeted slightly low in 2025, just based on prior years and what we're seeing trending this year. We will get a little bit more, and that's what I'm keeping the budget at for 2026. Per capita taxes, again, pretty stable and in line. Real estate transfer taxes, it's really, really hard to budget for real estate transfer taxes. You don't really know what the sales are going to look like in the future years. So just looking at the history and what we're coming in at right now, I think we just keep it at the same rate, hopeful that there'd be more coming in next year. But right now, we need to be a little conservative when we're budgeting. And last but not least, real estate property taxes, which I've talked about multiple times. Okay, as far as general fund expenses, just a little bit more detail on that. Expenses are actually increasing 4.7% year over year. Like I said, most of that is fixed costs. If you look at the increases that I had mentioned earlier on the expense side, 4.7% really isn't much when you're looking at a year-over-year budget. Again, most of it is fixed costs. Here's a more detailed version of the general fund. It gives you a comparison of what projection is for 25 and what 2026 budget is, just based on categories. As you can see, as I've mentioned, 80% of our Expenses are our salaries, medical costs, and other benefits like pension. Most of our budget is fixed. The rest is operating for services that we, provide to the township, and that's how, that we need. I do want to also mention that within the organization, from a staffing perspective, because I know a lot of people ask this, we do not have any overlap. The only places of overlap are the police department and public works department. However, as you guys know, these are essential for the services that we provide and to effectively meet the service demands for the township.
Meg, a quick question on the projections.
Sure.
If, I'm just pointing out the police just because it's such a big number, but between, let's say, 2022, where it was 5.7 off of,
Presentation issue.
I
yeah,
should,
yeah,
I do need to mention, so I should have mentioned that before. The reason why, so if you actually, I wouldn't necessarily look at the categories, I would look at the overall budget because, and when you see the detailed budget, if you look at your detailed budget that you should have in front of you or what I sent, you'll be able to see the line items clearer. We used to put healthcare and all the employer costs into one category. We've now departmentalized it so that it's better, you can see it better by department, so we're able to give costs by department moving forward. So it looks like there's a huge jump in police, but it's really, there isn't. It's that we're reallocating healthcare and other benefits to the departments now in 26 forward.
because the way it's shown in 2022, it's about a third of the overall expenditures. In 2029, it's more than half.
Yeah.
So it's,
That's the reason,
Okay.
because the police department has the most
Yeah,
staff
yeah.
members, and that healthcare cost is moving to that. So a majority of it does go there. So that is the reason.
Yeah, so you have a sort of a true cost of service associated with each of the
Correct.
respective functions.
Moving
So,
forward.
yeah, it makes sense to do it that way. It's just I want to make sure that we have an apples to apples comparison. That's all.
Correct. And moving forward, again, you'll have that. It's a presentation issue, as Mega said. It's largely at that point, because of that presentation change, you almost have to focus on bottom line kind of stuff. So.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, in the past, you weren't getting a true picture, and that's why we're trying to provide that moving forward.
That's why we hired you.
All right. The next slide is giving you a summary of revenues and expenses just overall and giving you our bottom line. So if you can see, there's a lot of red in there, unfortunately. As I mentioned, revenues remain flat, and the township is unfortunately projecting a deficit at this time of $554,658 in 2026. And then moving forward in subsequent years, it tends to double, triple. Again, the only interfund transfer we have in here right now is a little bit over $1 million transfer of the interest from the LMT Sewer Trust. If you look year over year, operations have not changed much. It's all fixed costs. It's all relative to what we need from a service standpoint. So what are our options for 2026? So the first option we have that'll help us for 2026 and a little bit of 27 is we have $2.4 million sitting in the sewer fund from the sale. We need to close that fund out at some point. We no longer have the sewer fund. We suggest that we do that transfer if you guys approve it. That will help us at least get in, able to function in 2026 and part of 27, but we do have to find a solution for the future. I mean, this is only going to help us for a year, and then we won't have enough to move forward. So,
Yeah, so just to clarify, I know you referenced sale. It does relate to the sale, but it's not sale proceeds. So this is essentially operating revenues associated with the operation of the
Correct.
sanitary sewer system pre-sale, and then also the collection of delinquency that's occurred through Portnoy that you guys had initiated. At this point, again, as the board is aware, there was some liability to Morrisville Municipal Authority based on some billing questions back and forth. That's been resolved. All of the sort of miscellaneous capital projects that were commenced prior to the transition of the system from the ownership of the system, all of those are done. So at this point, we feel comfortable that our, from a sewer perspective, we don't have, significant liability. And so therefore, these excess operating revenues now are available to shift to the general fund and support the general fund.
The other piece I wanted to mention, which, it's an option, of course, but it's also something that we're looking to do, is the stormwater fee. If we do levy the stormwater fee, there is a $283,000 transfer per personnel to the stormwater fund, which will help reduce some of the expenses in the general fund as well. Okay, any questions on the general fund? I'm going to ask if you have questions at the end too, but before
Where are we at, the sewer fund here? We also have, what I'll call the old bond fund, where we had to pay off some projects there. Is that still a significant chunk of change that's sitting there?
Those at this point were more allocated to they're required to be used for capital projects. So
that's-
you'll see.
That's Monday.
You'll
Yeah.
see at that point, it'll be Monday that
Okay.
we'll talk about that.
And I will go over all the funds today, but the details of anything related to capital will be on Monday.
Yeah.
So you'll see, some of that up
Okay.
here. I'll go through them. Okay. All right, so next up is the Park and Rec Fund. So the Park and Rec Fund is finally operating with a positive fund balance after several years of deficits caused really honestly by transfers to the debt service fund. We had ongoing payments earlier in the earlier years to the debt service fund, which needed to be made, but unfortunately we didn't allocate the right amount of revenue or millage in the fund to be able to do those transfers. We were transferring funds over that we didn't have. I did also want to mention, we did have a budget of transferring $50,000 from the Park and Rec Fund to the pool fund this year. I would suggest and recommend that we do not do that, just so that we can continue to build on this fund that we have and sustain it. Right now, it is self-sustainable, as long as we don't do any transfers out. The only transfer, like I had mentioned earlier, that I would recommend and that is sustainable within this fund is the GOR fund, because we do need that, the Garden of Reflection Fund, which again, we are working through and trying to see if we can get other funding for.
The Park and Rec fee and lieu dollars, which I think are doing okay, we're mostly considering that for capital.
Correct. I will mention that again in a slide moving forward, but we will talk more about it.
Okay. I'm wondering if we ever need to transfer any of that money into this to help it out, or
I think it's not allowable.
is it not allowed?
Because it's designated for
It
projects usually.
it's typically maintenance and then capital additions to the system. There's a
Yeah.
little bit of flexibility. They modified the MPC a number of years ago to address maintenance. So perhaps you could have some of the cost associated with people attributable to that. But again,
We also know we have
it's
significant maintenance issues in Park and Rec.
Correct,
So I
correct.
get that.
Yeah.
We'll spend it somehow, just, where, okay.
Okay, so revenues are projected to increase slightly year over year. That's supported by camp fee adjustments, which are necessary. So it's just slight adjustments that we're trying to make to sustain the operations within the fund. Real estate property tax millage is good and viable as is. But again, they're expected to slightly decrease year over year, as I mentioned earlier. Interest revenue, as I mentioned earlier, is declining overall just because of trends as well as fund balance. On the expense side, we're actually trending below budget in 2025. For 2026, 2026 reflects only a slight increase from the projections, and the reason being is because we've reallocated some of our staffing and operational costs to make sure it makes sense from the Park and Rec Fund and the Pool Fund. And we've also, we're also trying to maintain this fund, so we are trying to not plan any transfers like we have in the past. So maintaining the current millage rate and the periodic fee increases that we have, either annually or every year, will help sustain and stabilize this fund. As you can see, looking forward in 2029, we will have to kind of address what we're going to do. Again, we still have time. That's 5 years from today. We could see a little bit of a different trend, hopefully, on the revenue side, but there could be a slight negative fund balance in 29 if we don't find another way of increasing our revenues by then. But that's the future. It's kind of where it's trending at this point. It could change. I just wanted to point that out. But overall, this fund is sustainable as is, and hopefully will continue to be sustainable.
Megan, question.
Sure.
I'm looking at this, it seems like we have a jump in recreation administration for the 2025, and then a significant decline in 2026.
So I should have mentioned this as well. So there's been some changes. I think I've outlined this in my reports. We redid all of the chart of accounts for all of the funds, and that's why this is showing this way. In the past, with the Parks and Rec, it was very detailed, and then this last year, they ended up condensing everything and budgeting everything under that recreation administration line. So, and then moving forward, I've actually started to break it down again because it should be broken down per the chart of accounts. That's why you see that up and down. Does that make sense? So it's just how the staffing was allocated and how we were allocating. We weren't drilling down to the levels.
Is that, any of that, so it's, the overall money stays the same, it just gets allocated?
Correct. It's similar to what happened in the general fund where we're trying to
Least
fix
example.
the departments
Right,
and
yeah.
make sense of it.
But that doesn't, that's not a shift in between Parks and Rec. Oh, sorry, that's not a shift between Parks and Rec and other funds then? It's all within the fund?
No, there is also some shift
Okay,
between this fund and pool. We were,
Okay.
the allocations of people, let's just say weren't looked at and
right, yeah,
in the like in detail for the last couple of years. And so after, working through that and understanding what the proper allocation was, we're budgeting better.
okay.
And even with the shift on, like, from the public works side of things, with the staffing change and the reporting change, we're also redistributing and kind of getting a better understanding of where those folks are working, and we're actually allocating them correctly, and their actuals are being distributed correctly. So in the past, we would, not to go into so much detail, but we would actually book their allocations ahead of time, like it was a planned allocation, but now we're actually booking their allocations with actuals. So we're getting a proper timesheet that tells us where they're actually working each day, and we're booking it that way, versus in the past, we would just do it, it was a guess.
Thanks.
So-
Yep.
Not to stay on Park and Rec.
No,
too much,
you're okay.
But in terms of the just looking at the two line items, participant recreation and Parks and Recreation, right underneath recreation administration, it looks like they have significant deltas between certain years. How are they defined? Just, is it related to what John was just asking about, or is it something completely
So
different?
it's both. It's
Okay.
between the fact that we went back and forth on how we were allocating people within the fund, and it also goes back to how we were allocating people within pool and Park and Rec.
Okay.
Because those
They overlap.
two kind of go together in a
Okay.
way, from a people's allocation. And I'm talking about full-time allocations. Seasonal folks have always been allocated based on where they fall, but it's the full-time and some of the public works, the old Park and Rec Public Works folks. Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Sure. All right, any other questions on Park and Rec before I move on? Okay. Next is pool fund. So, as you can see in the financials, unfortunately, the pool fund has been operating with a negative cash balance for several years. Current pool revenues include membership fees, guest passes, swim team fees, and then the snack bar rental fees. And unfortunately, they're not sufficient to cover operating expenses. Revenue levels have really remained flat year over year, with only one modest increase observed in 2024. Expenses are projected to finish more favorably than budget, so we have really been working on cutting as much expenses as we can based on the fact that we're not coming up with the revenue to sustain that. We've also, like I mentioned in the earlier slide, we've also reallocated and relooked at staffing allocation from a FTE level to make sure that we're allocating it correctly based on what really occurs and not just based on a plan. So with those adjustments, we were able to relook at the expenses and make sure it was accurate, but it's not enough to unfortunately sustain the fund in the future. We really need to figure out what we're gonna do here as from a revenue standpoint and how we're gonna continue to operate this, because unfortunately, we don't have any other fund that can support this at this point. So what are some options? So number one, Monica will be discussing in more detail at the next meeting on some sales and membership fee strategies that may help. Again, this will help maybe for a year or two to help us like gain some time possibly to be able to really come up with a plan for the future. But I just based on how membership is right now and distribution, it may not sustain for much longer.
And not for nothing, I thought I saw Monica. Oh, there she is. Mike's head's in the way. Sorry, Monica. Kidding. No, we also know, just reading Monica's reports, we know there are potentially significant capital projects, and obviously we know from other stuff, so that coupled with membership numbers and fees, we just have to look at it holistically to see how the heck we can
Makes
manage
sense, and that's exactly what we're gonna do next,
Yeah.
at the next meeting. So again, that may help for a year or two, but we need to talk about the future.
Yep.
What's our long-term plan? One possibility is that there is no millage cap for Parks and Rec. The Parks and Rec special millage can be increased. There's no cap for it. Do we do that so that we can help sustain the pool? Basically, increase the cap on the Parks and Rec and then transfer that over to the pool to be able to sustain it? Or do we look at reducing the level of service we have today to be able to keep the pool open? We really need to start thinking about that because, as you can see, we're already in the negative. We can't sustain for this year or next year at this point, so.
I know you know Middletown. Does Middletown have a pool? I forget.
They don't. They have a country club that had a pool, but they closed it.
She comes to our pool.
Yes, I do.
I know. I just know that's sort of the trend. A lot townships locally have been closing pools because what's the old saying about pools and boats? Your two favorite days are when you get them and when you get rid of them, or something like that.
Correct. Yeah, they are.
Which I'm not
expensive.
suggesting. I just know they're difficult to keep afloat. Sorry, pardon the pun.
Yes. So that's the pool. Do you have any questions on that?
Save them for Monday, I think.
A lot to think about. Okay, so we'll move on to the golf fund. So the golf fund has continued to perform exceptionally well, achieving strong year-over-year gains. In 2026, the fund is projected to exceed $1 million in surplus, further strengthening both the cash balance and the ending net position. It's important to know that right now, as Dave mentioned earlier, we do not have any interfund transfers projected in this. We wanted to show you what the golf fund looks like, revenue and expense-wise, what they're coming in at before any transfers, just to clearly show you what their gains are. I also wanted to mention that through 2025, the golf fund was transferring $455,000 annually to the general fund to pay off borrowing that they did during COVID to sustain the golf course at that time. That borrowing is complete at the end of 2025. They no longer owe the general fund any funding after that. 2 other transfers were being made up to the end of 25. We'll continue to do that till the end of the 25, and then we'll have to make decisions on how we want to move forward. The other ones are $75,000 to the golf bond repayment fund to, I guess, repay what was paid for the debt payment for the golf fund from the sewer sale. And then last but not least, we were transferring $225,000 each year to the golf capital fund for savings, basically. Again, more to come on that because, we do have capital.
That was going to be my question.
Yes.
Is this inclusive of capital
No,
projects
this
that
is
we've
not
okay.
inclusive of capital. Again, we wanted to show you how every fund is operating today without any capital, because capital is additions, right? We do need to do them, we do need to maintain, but we need to see if we can operate efficiently first before we can, and then plan for that in the future.
I think golf, we have significant capital projects that we have over an extended period. So some of the projections in terms of final cash balance at the end of the year are probably a little inflated versus what we'll actually end up with once we spend on capital for the golf.
In 2026, if we decide to do that.
Yeah,
yes.
well, based on what we've talked to Mike about, probably through 2029 or later.
Correct,
Yeah.
yes. There are many plans
Yeah.
that we'll
Yeah.
talk about.
Some big
in the
ones, that's
next-
why I'm curious.
Yeah, so, again, as Mega's saying, it's to focus on just the operating of the course, what the margins are between operating revenues and operating expenses, and then we can have those conversations. We've had conversations about capital needs, and obviously there's different ways to fund that. So, as was previously discussed, there's room, for example, if you chose to issue debt specific to the golf course, there's space to cover debt service associated with those improvements. There's the potential for pay-go in some element. So again, just focusing first on operating, how's it functioning, and then we can talk about both the interfund transfer side and then also the capital side.
Yep, that was exactly what I was just about to say. Like I said, the golf course team has identified several significant capital maintenance projects that they hope to address, which will be discussed at the next meeting. And therefore, we recommend that all transfers be temporarily paused so that we can talk about that first and then see if those funds, those transfers that we normally do could help us with some of those capital needs. Next up are the rest of the funds. I know this is really small, I'm sorry, but I wanted to make sure I covered everything, and I didn't want to have 100 slides because it doesn't make sense to. So most of the other funds remain stable or will be discussed further at the next meeting. So the street light fund is self-sustaining with a positive fund balance. There's nothing really there to talk about. It's the millage that we have in there is able to function and keep the fund stable. The hydrant fund, there is a little requirement of a slight millage adjustment in that fund. We're requesting, or we need to basically up the millage from 0.33 to 0.373. It's very small in 2026 to be able to offset rising hydrant service costs. The hydrant service costs have been increasing year over year, and we'll go into the negative if we don't do that. It's so tiny that it shouldn't really affect anything, but I did want to bring that up. The Park and Recreation Fee in lieu of Fund, which you were asking about earlier, remains stable. It does have a strong fund balance. Right now, we do have the Memorial Park expansion project carryover planned in there. We did start some of that project this year. We have a grant that's coming in to fund most of the project. That is also planned in that fund in '25. That carries over to '26, so that is in there still. But then any other additional projects, like I said, will be discussed at the next meeting. We'll talk about the Park and Rec Capital Fund as well at the next meeting, because again, it pertains to capital. As discussed earlier, the sewer fund is ready to be closed pending the decision on the $2.4 million transfer of the remaining funds. The traffic impact fund is stable with a healthy balance. We don't have any new projects planned at this time, but if there are any projects that we do see fit and can be put in that fund, we can talk about that at the next meeting. It's very limited on how we can use it, though. The American Rescue Fund was closed in 2025. All of those funds have been fully utilized. I just want to make sure I highlight every single one so that you guys are aware, and it relates back to what you have in front of you. The LMT Sewer Fund continues to grow monthly with the required annual interest transfer already planned. Lastly, on this slide, we have the Golf Capital, the Golf Bond Fund, which we talked about earlier. We need to make a decision on, what we're doing with those funds. Right now, they're just sitting, whatever funds we've already transferred. It's not a lot, but there is some funds sitting in there. We have the Golf Capital Fund, which has some balance, which we'll talk about at the next meeting. And then to move forward, we also have the bond and the special projects fund, which again, we'll talk about in more detail at the next meeting because they are related to capital. The debt service fund.
Can I just ask one question?
Sure,
Just,
of course.
And this is, I guess, a question directed to the board members that were here at the time. So as Mega noted, there was a $455,000 transfer that was coming from the golf fund to the township's general fund to repay a subsidy that occurred during that period of time where there was, related to the downturn associated with COVID and so forth. My understanding is that the strategy, I guess, at the time was that once that was paid, and not that you can't reverse course on this, I just want to make sure we have a baseline understanding. When that was paid off, the intent was, so right now, the contribution to the golf bond repayment fund was relatively nominal. It was like $75,000 annually. Again, as Mega said, the intent of that fund, as we understand it, was the roughly $15 million of sewer sale proceeds that were used to pay off the debt associated with the golf course was essentially going to be self-amortized, meaning the township was going to incrementally pay back that investment of those sale proceeds back to itself through the golf fund. And so when the subsidy was done, assuming that performance continued to be good in the golf fund, that you were going to start accelerating repayment back. So that $75,000 was intended to accelerate to something equivalent, roughly, $455 plus the $75 to start recapturing some of that. Was that? I just want to make sure that is.
I think
That's accurate or not, just because it wasn't here at the time?
The intent was that we wanted to account for that bond prepayment on the golf side, so that we would have an accounting of it, so that the golf fund was sustaining on its own, right? Even despite all that stuff. So that's why that was intended to go up over time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So essentially again, you guys, again, have discretion to make changes as it relates to that strategy, but we just want to understand the base strategy was, again, that nominal $75,000, not to dismiss $75,000, but that small contribution that was going into the golf bond repayment fund. Once that larger interfund transfer went away, then the golf fund would essentially accelerate the repayment of what was paid on its behalf, right?
Right, yeah.
And then at that point, you would retain discretion on what to do with what the monies that go into the golf bond repayment fund. You could have it as an interfund transfer to the general fund to support general operations. You could do something else with it. You had flexibility. I just want to make sure we understand sort of
Now,
baseline
again,
strategy.
I could be,
Is that-
the intent was that once that we paid off that amount from the Gulf Fund had borrowed,
Right.
that nominal fund could be
Incre-
broken into some component would be capital investment or back to the general fund.
Okay.
All of that, again, my assumption is that would definitely be flexible in terms of if we had capital expenditures, stretch out the repayments that we were expecting from the Gulf Fund to pay off that could be possible as well. So I don't think we were as doctrinaire about that spending. I think the board's intent was, and y'all.
Keep going.
Yeah, I think our board's intent was that we wanted to make sure that the promise of the golf course of being self-sustaining in some measure is eventually recaptured.
Sure.
I mean, the general idea, once, I think what, I don't know, at least if you go back and read newspaper articles about the minutes, right? Because the sewer sale and the golf course were tied
Yeah,
together
they
a
were
little
tied
bit.
together, yeah.
Is that once we pay off the golf debt, make sure that the golf course is operating is sustainable.
Sure.
And then at the same time, the estimated number for like the golf course would also produce about $800,000 a year in revenue that could go back to the general fund. That's a very simplified
Right, okay.
So
summary.
I'm going to add to it and tweak it a little bit. Again, my memory's probably just as good as everybody's, a little bit strong and a little bit weak. The golf course, and we found ourselves in a position that the golf court long-term debt had been refinanced and refinanced and refinanced, that nobody was getting out from under it.
Right.
And we did think that as part of the sale of the sewer, right, everything was done. The intent was to ease the burden of the taxpayers as best we could. But there were a lot of different, moving parts to that. And I think positively, John, it's one of the things I credit you with and think it was a great idea. Like, how do we make that right? Like, it's not the golf course's fault, and yet it's not the average resident's fault. So we should, once we lessen their burden from that ballooning debt restructuring, they would start to pay back.
Sure.
I don't think it was ever meant to be, and once you got fully back, then you could, but just some acknowledgement that, there should be some repayment for the burden that the taxpayers took on to fix that situation.
Sure, no, understood. Okay, so I think, again, whether it's as you said, doctrinaire, or as strict as saying, okay, 75 plus 455 is sustained as an interfund transfer back to the general fund. The intent was to have some measure of that come back and then preserve flexibility for other things as you saw fit as time went on.
Right, and piggyback off of Supervisor Blundy's remarks is the promise of the golf course was that it would not use taxpayer money.
Right.
And I think what we're saying here is, okay, yes, we borrowed taxpayer money, but we will repay it back with revenue.
Correct. Okay. Which you've done in terms of the internal borrowing from fund to fund. I'm talking more about the sales proceeds that were used to pay. That was also intended to be recaptured over time. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right.
I mean, I feel like we're treading into a different conversation, so I don't know if it's tonight or Monday night, right? The board, from my position, we inherited a lot of debt and a tremendous amount of deferred maintenance for all of our assets. I think that's what we're seeing with the pool. I know that's what we're going to see when we see the plan for the golf course, and doing our best to rectify that in a way that doesn't have anybody hemorrhage, right? Little by little, we're righting the ship.
It's the how to eat an elephant, right?
Yep.
As weird as that is. Yeah.
Continue? All right. So one fund that I didn't mention earlier that was on the slide was the fire fund. It is stable and self-sustainable overall. The millage that's going into that fund is helping sustain the fund, and it's providing a healthy fund balance at the end of the year. We do as everyone need to talk about the future at some point from a volunteer perspective. I know we're doing the fire study, so that should help us in the future, but just wanted to make mention of that.
Not to back up, do you want to say anything about the golf fund and what was occurring in terms of end of year sweep of
Oh, sure.
essentially balance out of that fund to, just because we're recommending a change in approach there, so I
Correct.
just.
And we kind of started doing it, to be honest. But in the past, up to 23, and the reason why that change kind of occurred without really putting it out there is because I walked in, as you know, to the trying to close out 2023 and the financial audit, which we did. So 23 was the first year it kind of happened, even though that was a few years ago and I wasn't here because we just closed out the books. But in the past, we would zero out the golf fund balance and move all of that additional cash over to the general fund. We would like to request and also advise, I would say, that we not do that moving forward and keep that additional funding in the fund to help us with the future, with projects, with maintenance, whatever is needed. In the past, like I said, we've been pushing all of that over mostly to the general fund to help sustain the general fund. It was almost like a cash flow.
So I don't even know if you guys were aware of that or not, because you would budget, I mean, this is historic, you would budget an interfund transfer of a certain amount, and then there would be a margin that was left in that fund, and then internally it was being then shifted over to the general operating account. Wasn't budgeted, but was being shifted out of there. So you were essentially zeroing out
You weren't seeing the true.
your golf fund and not building up fund balance in that source of the source of the revenue that was left at the end. So.
And
Mega, how long were we doing that, and what was the total that we swept?
How long? Oh,
I mean,
years. I mean,
Since inception, do you have an idea of how much we've swept out from that golf fund?
I can get a number. I don't have that right now with me. I can get a number.
What was the thought process behind that? I mean, not that you know, but
I think that's what they did for most of the funds. As of January 1, they went, lack of a better expression, back to zero, and then it started again. But,
I think it might have been a cash flow exercise, to be honest, because other funds weren't sustainable on their own, and in order to sustain them and not show the true.
so even, I mean, again, not to.
That's what I can see from the previous numbers that I've
Even
been
some of
looking
these
at.
other funds, again, the goal was, let's get it back to zero.
Yeah.
So even though performance was poor, let's just say in certain regards, it was, let's get it back to zero, so that it's not, so you didn't, so if it, again, I'm not saying anything improper, I'm just saying it wasn't as clear to you in terms of the performance of specific functions, I think.
so Dave, if the pool was red and that was back to zero, but the golf course was black and that was back to zero, that's how it was presented.
That's my understanding, is that, yes, it was, and again, I don't know, I don't think there was general awareness or discussion at the board level. I think that's how it was being self-administered internally.
Also, just to comment on the pool side, I think what you guys were getting presented was net position, which includes assets, so
Yeah.
you won't, I mean, you're seeing it trend down now, but back then, the asset was,
That's a good point. So
you weren't seeing the cash balance. I have now added that in for both of our enterprise funds so that you're able to see that
So
clearly.
now you're not just seeing the value of the asset, which is essentially a book value associated with an asset, you're seeing what the actual cash balance is in those funds. And so some of what you're seeing here in terms of, where there's a fund deficit is a function of the fact that now you have a true presentation of cash versus just a giant asset that may be valued at $15 million that's being depreciated over time, and you're saying, oh my goodness, there's value there, but from an operations standpoint, it's tough to make decisions when you don't really know what's there. Not improper treatment of those assets based on accounting.
Makes it much more difficult to manage when you don't know.
Correct.
Meg, if you could just get that number for Monday.
Of course, no problem.
Thank you.
Yeah.
James, do you have any, how far would you like us to go back?
Well, I mean, ideally, it's it's been 20 years. So, I mean, if we're looking at the golf course as a whole, how the township wants to approach any repayment of debt, shouldn't we be looking at the entire? I mean, what do you think, Dave? That's.
So you're basically saying that that when we were just talking about sort of amortizing repayment, because of that practice, there should almost be a credit against that potentially, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't you agree?
I mean, that's,
you're hitting it. I mean, you're hitting them twice, right? You're saying you're not repaying us, but we're going to sweep your balance at the end of the year.
I don't disagree with that, James.
So, I mean, if you can go back 20 years, that'd be great. I don't know if that would help any of the other board members from a how we approach the golf course, because if there's a stigma that the golf course.
I don't know if we have. I at this point I have probably 2020 and forward, but I can try my best to see what kind of financial information I can dig up. Unfortunately, our department was running on paper, so I don't know what's been kept and what hasn't. And our system only trends back to, there might be more than 20. I'll have to look. I'll have to look at what.
Yeah, I mean,
And I'll do my best.
Do what you can.
Yes.
Yes,
And we can see the trend.
Get some
Of course.
sleep and go home on the weekend.
Sure.
Don't.
not a problem.
Thank you.
Any other questions on golf before I continue? Okay. All right, so other funds. Debt service fund is stable. You know, debt payments are decreasing as we pay off the debt on that end. So the millage is accurate for what we need in that fund. Regency Bridge Fund, that has a restricted fund balance. There's no reoccurring revenue in there. We're planning, there's a project that needs to be completed. We're planning on doing that hopefully in 26 and closing out that fund. It's the completion of the project. The capital fund, we closed that fund and we moved the very little value that was left in it into the special projects fund. There's no reason to have two different project funds, so we figured we'd condense that. Pool capital fund we'll talk about at the next meeting. Tree bank fund is stable. We have a decent fund balance in there. We're at this point planning on 40,000, which is kind of what we've had over the years of allocation in 2026. Liquid fuels fund, we got our estimate of what our motor vehicle taxes and turnback is going to be. They're giving us about $997,000 next year. That fund balance is stable. We're going to be utilizing it for our normal highway operating expenditures and planned capital that we have. We have some carryover from 25 on some vehicles that Derek's purchased. That's going to carry over. That's what's in there right now. But any new capital, like I had mentioned, will be discussed at the next meeting in detail. And some of that could go into that fund. Road machinery fund, again, we use that for capital projects. Discuss that next meeting. Sidewalk fee and lieu, again, mostly for capital projects. Can discuss that the next meeting. Garden of Reflection Fund, that's come up a few times in this meeting. So we do, like I mentioned, we are trying our best to see if we can get other funds to help sustain that. But right now, we have some transfers from the Park and Rec Fund to be able to continue that maintenance. Garden of Reflection Capital Fund, more discussion next meeting. Roadway improvement, again, more discussion next meeting. Patterson Farm has the normal operating expenditures, and then there's carryover from this year into next year for the rest of the building improvements that we planned. We need to discuss future upkeep of that. If you actually look in your budget packet, there is no fund balance really left in that fund in the future years, so we're going to need to figure out how we're going to fund that. And that's just for normal maintenance. Again, no other projects planned at this time. And again, more discussion at the next one if we need that. Last but not least, we have the Ambulance Rescue Fund. It's stable, no changes. It's really a contribution fund that's continuing as is at this point. The last slide I have is just a full-out picture of the status of our fund balance. This is all the funds I just discussed today. It does not have our capital funds because, again, we'll talk about that next, at the next meeting. I think it just makes it easier to see the whole picture when you're seeing the operating side, because that is something we need. In order to provide services to the township, we need to sustain these operating funds. We have really no choice. So I wanted you guys to see that picture first and see how we look at this time on the operating side. And then, of course, unfortunately, we do have a ton of capital projects and maintenance items that we kind of have no choice but to do and will need funding for. But, got to see both sides of it. This is what we look like. It's basically what you have in your packet if you look by fund. It's also what we've discussed. A lot of our funds are stable and they're able to sustain to 2029, as you can see. But we do have our main funds, the general fund, pool fund, unfortunately, that are going into the negative. I did discuss with you the Parks and Rec Fund that may go negative in 2029. Again, we have some time for that. And then Patterson Farm Fund, which you see in 2020 and 2029, ends up going into the negative. So we do need to figure out the plan for that. Any questions? Next meeting will be on November 10th, where we're going to discuss capital funds and related, capital projects and related funds. That's it.
Thank you. Any, I know it's been pretty back and forth. Any additional board questions?
No, thank you. It was a very good presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Before you go, any public comment? I know you're a pro, but as a reminder, anyone that may be calling in from home, please state your name, whether or not you're a resident, and try to keep it to 3 minutes.
Sure. Hi, I'm Lori Gray. I am a resident of Lower Makefield Township. First, I have to say I've only been doing and participating in this for probably 2 or 3 years, but I'm very impressed. This is so different than what we've seen in the past, and I want to thank you for all of the information, all of the explanation, everything that you've done to get us to this point. So thank you very, very much. It's understandable, it's relatable, so I appreciate that. I do just have a couple questions, if I may. First, did we go self-funded in 2025? Was that the first year that we went self-funded, or?
No, we transitioned in July of '23.
July of '23?
Yes,
Okay,
yeah,
thanks.
yep.
And then just a couple questions, because I don't remember everything, but the roadway improvement fund, was that what we had the special fee for in 2025 for roadway improvement? Is that?
So I believe it was 24 and 25.
24 and 25?
That is correct.
Oh, thank you.
but
You
yes,
see,
but yep.
see how when you pay, you don't, you just get so used to it, right?
Sure.
But my point, I guess, or my question really is that the fees that we're paying through taxes, that's what's going into the roadway improvement fund, I guess is really my question.
That is correct. There's a
Okay.
special purpose millage rate that's supporting that fund, yes.
Well, there'll be more discussion at the next meeting. 'Cause it
Okay,
is
so we'll
related.
see where we are, expenses versus, okay. And then just one other question I had, well, that I'm going to ask tonight, but I think it was just on the leaf collection. I know the leaf collection went up from 75 to 95. And was that enough to then cover it? Because I wasn't sure if that, I saw the expenses and what it was,
Yes.
but I wasn't sure.
Yes,
So,
currently
okay, so
that is enough to.
we're covering that then?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional public comment in the room? Anyone online? No one online. Okay. With that, Megan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll close this item. Since we do have a public meeting, though, we do have to provide for off-topic public comment. So if there's anyone that would like to make any other public comment, please come up to the podium, state your case. Anyone online? All right. With that, I will say meeting is adjourned. Have a great evening and see you all Monday.
Thanks, y'all.